But we're starting today with an update on Prime Minister Boris Johnson after it was announced that last night he had been moved to intensive care after his coronavirus symptoms worsened.
In a moment, we'll be joined by ICU consultant Dr Alison Pittard and our own Dr Sara. But first, we're joined by journalist Andrew Pearce. Morning, Andrew.
Good morning to you.
Morning. I watched the news last night. The news was it broke that the Prime Minister had been taken into intensive care, and then the hysteria started. Now, obviously, our first primary concern is for him and for everyone who is in a serious condition with COVID-19 right now. But it seemed to me that everybody suddenly wanted instant answers. As we sail through these troubled waters, everybody wants to know everything straight away. Who's in charge? What happens now? This morning I heard, what happens if there's a nuclear war? Who presses the button? We have got to be very careful here that we take each step at a time and that we approach this with level heads.
I think that's right, Phil. And the thing is, you see, I mean, I think our first concern, and you're right, is the Prime Minister. He's a dad. He's got a partner who's heavily pregnant, who carries symptoms, who will be absolutely worried sick. And like all Prime Ministers, he wants to lead from the front. This Prime Minister, more than any other, feels a great sense of responsibility to lead by example. Look, he's crashing down the economy. What Prime Minister does that deliberately? He's ordering us to stay at home, and he's defied his own medical advice, because if he'd done as he was told by his GPs, because I've been through this virus, he would have stayed in bed for up to 12, 14 hours a day and kicked it. Instead, he's pushed his body again and again and again, and he's now paying a price for it. But there is a chain of command in his absence, where the country is not suddenly rudderless because Boris Johnson isn't in the cabinet room making decisions. He's got an entire cabinet of men and women, very able, very capable, who can run the show. But really, the people who are running the show anyway are the medical experts, the people we see on our television quite regularly, the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, the Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, and others. They are the ones really who are still leading our fight back against this terrible virus. And they're still in position, they're healthy, and they're getting on with it.
Andrew, do you think going forward that there might be a sort of role for a Deputy Prime Minister? There have been Deputy Prime Ministers in the past, but do you think sort of going forward this would be officially something that we would see?
I guess it's a possibility. The Tories have never really liked the role. Mrs Thatcher had a Deputy Prime Minister, Geoffrey Howe. Look what happened there, he did for her. John Major had Michael Heseltine, who was a very experienced minister. David Cameron, of course, had a Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, but he was a Liberal Democrat, a junior part of the coalition. And the idea that he'd have ever really taken commanding instructions over a parliament dominated by the Tories is for the birds. But we do have a First Secretary of State, that's Dominic Raab, the Foreign Minister, the Foreign Secretary. But what was a bit of a game changer, he revealed in that press conference last night, he hadn't even spoken to the Prime Minister since Saturday. So I think we probably do in future need a quite clearly defined command structure, so that if a Prime Minister is incapacitated, he or she is instantly replaced in big decisions by whoever, who it will be in this case, Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary.
But Andrew, can I just go back to something you said a moment ago, which was you've had the virus and you know how debilitating it can be.
It's terrible.
That if he had taken to his bed and if he had taken it easy, because we know that one of the symptoms can be incredible fatigue, that perhaps, and we don't know this, and there is so much speculation around at the moment, but perhaps he may not have ended up in the situation that he's in now.
That's just all I can base on my own experience, in the sense that when I got this virus, I went down with it on a Sunday. By the Monday or Tuesday, I felt like I'd been beaten up and woken up in a gut, and I thought, how did I end up here? The only way I got through it was taking to my bed and sleeping. I didn't eat for 2 days, I just drank water. You feel like somebody's trodden all over your body, or even ridden a steamroller over your body. You ache in every place, you ache in parts you didn't know even existed, and those terrible headaches and sore throats. I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have picked up my pen, let alone taken life and death decisions, which is what the Prime Minister and his team are doing right now. So I just think if Boris had listened to the GPs and gone to bed, he might not be in intensive care now. But I understand why he soldiered on. He's the Prime Minister. He's the leader. He wants to be seen to be doing a good job. I think he has been largely doing a good job. There seems to be quite a lot of consensus about that. But but I suspect the price he's paid is where he is now, and we're all wishing it.
Yeah,
whatever.
we really do.
But what's interesting is that I mean, there've been suggestions, and you know, this is the sort of armchair politicians who suddenly decide that no, this is what we should do. That we should have a new cabinet formed by former prime ministers. Which in itself, you look at each of our former prime ministers, they've all cocked up in one way or another. Yeah. None of them are up to speed, as any of the cabinet or the medical team would be. Why suggest something like that?
I think there's no harm in Boris Johnson, if he wants to, calling up Gordon Brown about the economic aspect of this coronavirus crisis, because he was the Prime Minister who was on the watch at number 10 when we had the great banking crisis in 2008. But I go back to my point. The real people we need to be functioning on and firing on all pistons are the medical experts, the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, who's done that government broadcast, a voice of moderation, reasonableness and sensible. Now, he had the virus symptoms. He is self-isolated for a week. He's back and he's in his job. I repeat, if Boris had done the same, he might be too. But while the Chief Medical Officer, the Chief Scientific Advisor and their team are okay and healthy, and they're getting on with it, I feel quite reassured that the battle against the virus is continuing just as the Prime Minister would have wanted it. Because after all, it's not his strategy, it's one that's agreed with the Cabinet and with those medical advisors, who are the experts.
Andrew, what do you think this means for lockdown? What's your opinion of where we are at with that? Can we even make a stab in the dark as to when we could be coming out of this?
What I'm told is that this weekend, Good Friday, Easter Saturday, hard to believe it's Easter this weekend, isn't it? Because all weeks have merged one into another. They'll look at it, and I'm told there's going to be at least another 3 weeks lockdown. But I know there are pressures within Cabinet, not least from the Chancellor of the Exchequer. His job is to get the economy right, because that's going to be a very sick patient when we come out of this. He's pressing for some form of removal of the lockdown, but I don't think we can look forward to it any time really soon. Maybe they'll be looking at it in May, but I can't see much sign of us coming out of it in April. Unprecedented, isn't it? And I know that ministers really didn't want to close down schools. That was a decision they took right at the end, because they knew the havoc that is playing with parents who are now having to teach their kids at home and also try and keep them amused, which is especially difficult if you haven't got a garden and maybe you live in a tower block. Can't be much fun at all for any parents, can it?
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
for the
you.
moment.
Stay healthy.
And you too.
Thank you.
And you too. Thank you very much indeed.
Better.
Let's talk now to Dr Alison Pittard. She's been a consultant in anaesthesia and intensive care medicine in Leeds since 1997. Good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Perhaps you could explain, with your knowledge, the reason that the Prime Minister will be taken into intensive care. We were told that it was precautionary, but bearing in mind that all intensive care beds are like gold dust, all ventilators are like gold dust, surely he wouldn't have been moved there just as a precautionary measure?
I think the important thing to stress is that we are treating every patient as an individual, and exactly the same as we would do outside of COVID. So any patient who is on a ward who we're concerned about, who can't receive the number of the multi-professional team to look after them, can't receive the continuous monitoring, will be moved to an intensive care unit where that can happen. And sometimes we do admit patients to intensive care who don't actually need any organ support at that moment in time, but need to be watched very, very closely, so the minute something changes, the team can respond immediately. So just because we're in the middle of a pandemic doesn't mean that we're going to treat patients any differently.
And I was going to ask you, because it's been reported this morning that Boris Johnson needed 4 litres of oxygen to help him breathe, which is less than some ICU patients need. What does that mean to you when you hear that amount? What does that mean?
Well, it's difficult to know where that was being delivered. Was that being delivered on a ward or in the intensive care unit? And obviously, I can't speak specifically about the Prime Minister, but 4 litres of oxygen isn't a huge amount of oxygen in the context of the sorts of things that we deliver normally in hospital. And so you may find a patient who's had routine surgery, who for a variety of reasons needs some oxygen and may be having between 2 and 4 litres. So, as I've said, 4 litres isn't a huge amount of oxygen in the current situation.
Just to explain to us the fact that we have currently been told that he's not ventilated, which is quite an intrusive procedure anyway, but he is getting oxygen treatment. So what's the difference between a ventilator and that oxygen treatment?
So being sedated and being put on a ventilator is the sort of extreme end of the respiratory support, the help that we can give somebody with their breathing. And sometimes we have to do that because the patients are so sick or we think that they're going to deteriorate. And of course, we don't take that decision lightly. In between that and what can be provided on a ward, there's a huge amount of variation as to what we can do. And we treat every single patient as an individual and give them the appropriate support that is required. Now, what we have discovered during this pandemic, and particularly from information we've had from Italy and the experience within this country, particularly in London, is that initially we were sedating patients and putting them on a ventilator very early on in the disease process, because that's what we thought was needed. But now, as we have more experience, we can provide oxygen to patients in a different way, with a system that we call CPAP, which is continuous positive airway pressure support. And that means the patient doesn't need to be sedated, they can remain awake. And around 50% of patients are managing extremely well on that amount of support.
So can we make any guess at what sort of treatment he's currently receiving? What's he likely to be doing today?
It's very difficult to answer that. It depends how he's feeling in himself. It depends how sick he is. It depends exactly what support he is being given within the intensive care unit. And everyone behaves and responds to this virus in very different ways. So it's very difficult to try and speculate on what he's doing today.
Can I ask you about a statistic which has been bandied about this morning, and whether or not it's accurate, that if you are admitted to intensive care with COVID-19, your odds are about 50-50?
There's been lots of statistics circulated about lots of different things in relation to COVID. And what we have to remember is, irrespective of this pandemic or what brings you into intensive care, around 25% of patients will not survive their stay on intensive care. And obviously we know that with COVID-19, patients are responding sometimes in quite extreme ways. And so we would expect the number of people to not survive intensive care to be higher. But the rates that we are seeing in the UK are consistent, or in some situations better than what we've seen around the world so far.
OK, all right.
Dr. Pittard, thank you very much indeed.
Right, let's speak to our Dr Sara, who is at home at the moment. Sara, it's lovely to see you. You are pregnant at the moment, as we know. I hope you're feeling well. Are you all doing good there?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm
good.
Snug in my own house.
Good to hear it. Good to hear it. I imagine right now, though, you can empathise with Carrie Symonds. She is the fiancée of Boris Johnson. She herself is pregnant at the moment. What advice would you be giving to her this morning?
I feel so sorry for her, because it's such an unsettling time to be pregnant anyway. You add coronavirus into the mix and that adds extra anxiety. And then to know that your fiancé, your partner, if your child is in hospital unwell, it must be really awful for her. I think what also adds to that is the fact that a lot of people aren't able to go see their partners in hospital. So it's not just her, but a lot of people who've had family and friends in hospital aren't able to visit them. So it is a really difficult time. But I think it's important she knows that he is in one of the best hospitals in the country, with the most, expert healthcare professionals looking after him. And hopefully it was all still precautionary.
It's a timely reminder that COVID-19 is without boundaries. It doesn't discriminate. And so no matter who you are and no matter what you do, and we've seen young people succumb, we've seen older people succumb to it. If ever there was a massive rubber stamp with stay at home written on it, then this is definitely the moment.
Yeah, we didn't need another wake-up call, but yet again, here is another wake-up call. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care what age you are, what walk of life you are. You can be affected. You need to stay home and socially distance yourself. We know from yesterday's press meeting that we think that the efforts are starting to take effect, which is excellent news, but we can't stop these efforts now. We need to know that we're over that peak and well ahead.
Sara, yesterday, I think this is what you were suggesting there, the death rate came down. I mean, does that mean that the measures we've put in place are working? I mean, how much of a positive sign can we read into this?
So it suggests that the efforts we're putting in place are working compared to if we hadn't been doing these efforts. So yes, that is a positive step forward, but it doesn't mean we can take our foot off the brake just yet.
All right, Sara, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much indeed.
Take care of yourself.
There's one thing here that you listened to various politicians talking this morning, that the borders of politics have been suspended. We are all in this together. Nobody had a brief for this. Nobody knew what it was going to be like. Everyone is discovering it as it unfolds in front of them, as we've seen, you know, so the Prime Minister now in intensive care. But people of all politics are wishing him well.
Absolutely.
Evelyn said, get well soon, Boris, you can beat this.
Bella says, Boris, we need you and your family needs you.
Mary says, you can do this, get well soon.
Lisa said, sending you get well wishes to his way.
And Howard said, wishing Boris a speedy recovery. And that's exactly what we do. We wish the Prime Minister the very best. We need him back at the helm. He's got what appears to be a great team behind him, leading us through this. So get well soon, and lots of love to his family and friends.